So I had to go to the third world, and I wound up in Yugoslavia. And I was a political science major at Yale, but I was not a very good student. And frankly, it was shocking how little I knew about that place. But it was a wonderful experience because I was over there. I wound up, I was supposed to leave after about 6 or 7 weeks. But I can't do this. I mean, remember, this is the Cold War and communism. This was in 1962. Sort of the apex of the Cold War. 1962 was when the Cuban Missile Crisis was, in the fall. Anyway, so I was really interested in communism. It was, and this was a communist country, although Tito had broken off from the Soviets and from Stalin. Anyway, it was a marvelous experience. I wound up going to the Soviet Union that same year and traveling through Eastern Europe, and I went to the Soviet Union, and it was wonderful. And except for being part of my personal background, it's not important, the story about my being a lawyer, but that's very important to me personally. I did. So that brings me back to law school. If I may, I'll just go on.
Sure.
While I was over there, I'd taken the LSATs, and I wasn't at all sure what I was going to do, but I was kind of interested in the Foreign Service. But I got over there and was disillusioned by some Foreign Service people. It wasn't that exciting. This is an amusing footnote. Where I was in Croatia, I talked with one of the guys in the consular office, and he said, you know what I do all day is I talk with little old ladies who are drawing Social Security from the United States because their husbands went over to the United States and were automobile workers and worked in a big manufacturing and made a lot of money and paid into Social Security, and they're entitled to it. And they said they're the richest person in their village. And they come in and, take care of business with them. But that's what they did. So I said, okay, so much for that. Anyway, what's important about law school and about my attitude toward law was that I didn't know anything about lawyers, and nobody in my family had been a lawyer. And so there I am, and actually, and from Yugoslavia, I had a very close friend, family friend, who was a prominent lawyer in Abilene, and I said, see if he can get me in Texas. And he did. I mean, I don't remember much, but I had the LSATs, and so I came back to start at Texas, and I came back on the surface on a Yugoslav motor ship. Well, that was part of my experience. I wasn't going to go get on some flight, and it was marvelous. And in mid-Atlantic, I've forgotten the tonnage, but we're not talking about a very big boat. And there were about 12 passengers, and the rest of it, the damn thing broke down. So I experienced being in the Atlantic without, the sound of the engines and the motion of a ship. When it's not there, you really notice. So we sat around for a few days while they fixed the motor, and then we cranked up again to get back. But I was late getting back to the United States, and therefore I was a week late getting to law school. So I called a good friend, Charles Scarborough from Abilene, whom you may know, the Scarboroughs. And Dallas Scarborough, his grandfather, is a Hall of Fame member. And Charles was in law school, and I said, what do I need to do? And he set it up. And I said, I don't have a place to stay. And he said, but you're a deke, aren't you? And why don't you just stay at the deke house for the time being? Well, I stayed there the whole damn year, which is really interesting. Anyway, so I get back to law school, and I drove down for the weekend. I'm a week late, and I go to my first class. Did you go to Texas?
It's in you.
Of course. And anyway, I got called on. Well, it was the second week of school. So the teacher I was going to be an example, and boy, he just reamed me out, totally unaware of the bizarre circumstance I was in, but it's funny about law school, the way it works. Anyway, I had a tough time. I knew Steve Sussman, who was the head of the law review, and didn't know him well, but at one point I said, how do you do this? I mean, I'm just having a real rough time. And I don't have one of those steel trap lines. I mean, the brilliant guys would play bridge all the time, and they'd cut glass. They had it made. Anyway, Steve, I remember, he said, well, he said, you know, I can read and I can write. And it dawned on me, and I've always said since then that the very best liberal arts education in the United States is law school. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. You know, you want to talk about business, read the antitrust stuff. You know, that's really it.
Right.
Anyway, so I went through law school, and I didn't do very well. I did get into moot court, and I won some moot court stuff. In fact, I won the Hildebrand moot court with Julius Glickman from Houston, who is now at Houston. He was my partner. And back in those days, that was at Texas. It was a big deal. It was done in the Towns Hall Auditorium, the finals. And the finals were before the entire 9-member Texas Supreme Court. So it was a big deal, big tradition.
Definitely.
And to show how smart I was as a lawyer, so we got to the point, Joe Greenhill, who became Chief Justice, asked me a question. And it was, the subject matter was immunity for cities. You couldn't sue a city because it was, you know, and because you were suing yourself, and that was the reason for the immunity. Anyway, the story that we had in our situation was a fire truck belonging to this little town, and Joe Greenhill said, well, what are you going to execute on in order to pay this judgment? And I thought for a minute, well, a fire truck. And it just brought down the house. I mean, the whole Supreme Court was just, and me too, I realized what I'd said. How ridiculous. But consolation prize.
Well, I'm sure it wasn't a consolation prize.
Anyway, so if, you know, when I was inducted yesterday, I told you I was disillusioned from law school. I'm not sure I wanted to do this, and I wasn't under any pressure. I didn't have a wife, child, or obligations, and so I could be a little bit foolish and let serendipity take its work, which I've always enjoyed, do its work, so I've always enjoyed. So, probably telling you more than you ever wanted to know, but I'm out at the Perini Ranch in Buffalo Gap, Texas, plowing with a Fordson tractor and waiting for the bar results, and I was really scared about failing the bar. Didn't have a job, didn't have a plan. But a pal from Abilene, a close friend, had gone to SMU. Roger Whitehurst. And of course, that's not your generation. You wouldn't know who it was. Roger had just opened his own practice in Dallas. He said, well, why don't you come to Dallas and let's see how you like it. And I liked it. I got to Dallas and all my misgivings went away. But there I was on the street in Dallas. Now what? Well, I had all these friends in law firms, and I started getting all sorts of crazy business. I've never had so much fun. And for some reason, despite all I've told you about myself, I had enormous confidence, and I don't really know why. I don't have that confidence today. I mean, for the first 20 years of my practice, I had it. And most of what we're going to talk about was in there. I was amazingly bold at some of the things I did. Anyway, for example, I filed the first Title VII case in the Northern District, the employment opportunity. I sued the Dallas Morning News, the big conglomerate, on behalf of a little newspaper in the teeny-weeny town of Plano, Texas at that time. And it was a little local newspaper, and the news was going to go in there and have its edition and just basically push that guy away. And I sued him, and we took depositions, did all this stuff for a number of weeks, and a big conglomerate came in from outside, bought my client out. He couldn't tell me who it was or how much he got, but I'd been paid by the hour, and so it was a victory because it all worked.
Yeah.
So I didn't know at the time how rare antitrust suits are. And I remember going before the federal judge with the lawyer for the other side, Steve Philbin, who died young, but was famous, a brilliant lawyer, and in Dallas and for the journalism. Anyway, and so Steve was on the other side, and Mac Taylor, who was the federal judge, called us in for a conference, and I remember standing there in his grand office there in the federal building in Dallas, beautiful, big spaces, and he's sitting there, we're standing there, and he said, what's the deal here? And I don't know what may have happened, if anything, behind the scenes, but that case was settled. But I think he was looking at us and he said, an antitrust suit? Who are these two guys? And he was right. I had no business. He had a big firm backing him up. I had a law student clerk. I mean, and he accompanied me when he took the deposition. That was it. Anyway, that's the kind of stuff I was doing. Well, young lawyers get criminal cases because you can take court appointments, you get a little bit of money, and also you get hired, and it's usually you're hired by some prominent lawyer whose maid or yard man has a son who's busted for drugs. And, you could see them calling around, whom do you know? And they knew me, and I had a good reputation for integrity and smarts, and it was, that's all there was to it. I got very active in the Dallas bar immediately. I was president of the junior bar. We had a new legal services project, that federally funded, that's still there, that's a hugely important federal program, part of the Lyndon Johnson programs, and I was the chairman of that. I mean, Jerry Buckmeyer, who became a federal judge, was on the board of directors, and all these other people. And I told you I was bold, and when I go back and think about it, I'm kind of astonished at my chutzpah. But anyway, they elected me, so I guess I would. So I was doing all sorts of stuff like that, and so I had a nice reputation, and people knew me, and I was getting these cases in criminal. Well, I hadn't been to the DA's office, and that's how you learn criminal law. It's like a postgraduate course. And I didn't know that, I hadn't bothered. I mean, I could have, if I had, my circumstances been different, I would have had to have been ready on day one to get a job and get some money. And I was just finding it all out a day at a time. And so I was thrown into the criminal course, and I was getting people out of jail and doing these different things, and then I was going into court, and I was beginning to think, this is really raunchy. I mean, what's happening? And the DA's office, this is Henry Wade's office, biggest law firm in Dallas, and Henry Wade was a very famous and successful DA in Texas, second only to Carol Vance in Houston. And by the way, personalities, they were just opposites. Carol Vance, used to see him in Austin when I was active in the TCDLA there, and he was such a gentleman before the legislature, which is not to say that Wade wasn't. Wade never went down there. But Wade was a tough old guy. He'd been an FBI agent. I think he was the first in his class at Texas. So he's a smart guy and very honorable. But he ran a tight ship. It was like the Marines, and that was kind of their reputation. And in the end, jumping forward several decades, a lot of problems have emerged because of that. Because, the Brady violations, again and again and again, have been the reason for these exonerations out of Dallas. Well, we all understand how that can happen. What prosecutor wants to give his case away by giving the other side the ace that's going to win the day? But that's what the law requires, and it's a good rule. Anyway, and there was these were this is after I was in the TCDLA and active in the 70s, but
you were one of the charter members in 1971.
Yeah. Yes. Anyway, the LEAA funded a defense college and a prosecution college in Houston. And it was there until Ronald Reagan was elected, and all that stuff was just shut down, all that money. We and Scrappy Holmes, was very much involved in the CDLP, and that was getting some of that money for us, which is very clever because the money was going toward, police hardware, and we were getting this, hey, we got to take care of this. We're a cog in this machine too. It's very clever. Anyway, in Houston, the government had funded these colleges, and John Douglas was the head of the prosecution college. And so embarrassed, I can't. He's a good friend of mine who was prominent, the head of the defense college, and prominent in the NACDL, and also
John Ackerman.
Yes, Ackerman. Thank you.
No problem.
John Ackerman was the defense, and they were going great guns. But one year I spoke for the prosecution. John Douglas invited me, and I was kind of exhibit A as a defense lawyer. And we were friendly because we crossed paths on a lot of stuff. And he said to me, why doesn't Henry Wade send any of his people down here? And I don't remember what I told him, but of course the answer was Henry Wade had his own house apparatus for teaching lawyers, and he didn't want somebody tinged with Washington liberalism. And, the prosecution college was not, it was a serious business, and people came from all over the country. The government would fund their attending this thing.
Right.
And anyway, and that was the reason, that's something on Henry Wade. Now, I'm going to jump back before there was TCDLA because I was practicing criminal law. And this is what I was facing. And I didn't know much what I was doing, but I'd get in there, and I'd see these things happening. I was going into the jails around. And so it piqued my curiosity a lot, and it was a good deal more meaningful than some little divorce or probate case I was having, so you can understand. But it was very difficult. There were no good books. Ray Moses in Houston had written a single-volume book. He was at the University of Houston, I think, and on criminal procedure, it was a godsend. The only other books was Paul McClung, who was in Fort Worth with a heart condition that prevented him from practicing trial law, but he loved it. And he worked for a federal agency and all his time reading criminal cases and compiling them into his still famous, he's long since dead, still famous book that bears his name, On Court Charges. Old Judge Irisman in East Texas, Fred Irisman, E-R-I-S-M-A-N, had compiled a book. There were no books, so it was real easy to get in the business, and he started keeping score of all the cases that were reversed. And that was really writing that for judges. Here's what will get you in trouble. So it was Arison's collection of reversible
errors, right?
And, it's limited because it was only reversible, but still, it was a book. But there was not much. And then you could go to Texas jurisprudence and all, it was sort of a crapshoot about whether or not that was really accurate. But that's all there was. And there were no courses. And because you were in Dallas with him at Coleman, there were very, very capable lawyers in Dallas practicing criminal law. But they didn't feel a need to reach out to people outside of the people in their own offices who were working for them, which was a great training ground. And so I was out, in terrible need of help, but didn't have access to them. So anyway, this went on for several years, and I was frustrated. I kept building up my civil practice, and I had really decided I'm not going to fool with this anymore. There's not enough stuff. There's no CLE. It's just a mess. And I never went to the DA's office. Probably shouldn't be here anyway. And it's like I explained when I was inducted to the Hall of Fame, and then one day I got the letter inviting me to be a charter member. And I just bit like a, bass on bait. I just loved it. I said, this is going to be everything. This is going to be the vehicle for it. I didn't know. I knew Phil Burleson, but I don't think I knew much about him. He just knew who I was. It was fine. But I never knew they were cooking up something. I wasn't part of that. And, of course, I never heard of Tony Freelo. And maybe had never heard of Frank Maloney. So, and next thing we know, we have this organization. Well, I was so eager, I'm not quite sure why, but I wound up on the board of directors early on. And I hope you're going to run out of time right I'm going, but these are important things. There was another lawyer who was a young lawyer who was very highly regarded, about my age. Turns out he was from Sweetwater, Texas, which is just down the road from Abilene. It was Stu Kleinert. And he and I were on the board together. We were kind of the young guys, and it was real nice. But Stu had some problems that, it affected him through his life. And he kind of fell by the wayside because he just, and I think for a time he dropped out of the practice of law, so he disappeared. But he and I were the young guys early on. And I was the 9th president of TCGLA, and that's because I'd gotten into this thing early on, and I'd done some real good things. Now, at CLE, I was angry about the absence of adequate CLE. The way State Bar did it, and there were some exceptions, but rare. You go to a program and there'd be a single page with bullet points, a subject that somebody was going to cover. But that wasn't worth a damn when you took it back to your office. That's what the guy was going to cover. But he didn't give you much. And the and I think totally stories about this particular, which is fine, except that if you have a kind of case, you did it was not comprehensive. So I was in charge of a course, and as you know, David, I started teaching a course at SMU, and one of the questions is, what in the devil? You just explained how you didn't know a darn thing. What were you doing teaching a course? If you remember, what I did was I told the students what I had learned. In other words, what I was teaching was the foibles in Dallas, which were many. I mean, it was so strange about the way the bond system worked. They had a writ system where I don't remember how this started, but you couldn't get out of jail in Dallas on bail without a writ of habeas corpus filed by a lawyer. Why? Because it's pleading. That was the excuse. And of course, it meant that you couldn't get out of jail without a lawyer. So you get picked up for a DWI. You had to get a lawyer to file a writ to get the bond and get you out. So an awful lot of the people who were practicing criminal law in Dallas were really sort of glorified bail bondsmen. But they were bail bondsmen who could go into court and negotiate a plea bargain, and it was over. But if you looked at the dynamics and the way the money flowed, it was most of it was that. Speaking of old when he's actually criminal, yeah, tears are hot. That was in Dallas. But it was also hilarious in other ways. They didn't believe in telephones because telephones might be corrupted by somebody, so that the only way you could communicate with these police departments in Dallas and in Dallas County was pieces of paper signed and stamped by some other police department. So to get somebody out of jail on DWI in Garland, Texas, I counted miles because it was just a nightmare. First I'd have to go to the bond office in Dallas and get the bonds. Then I would drive to Garland, meet and interview the client for the first time, he was in jail, and have him sign the bond forms. And then I would drive back to the sheriff's office, and I had the bonds and I was prepared to post them. I'm trying to think if I'm leaving something in. The bottom line was, by the time you did all this, it was 100 miles. The only good thing about it was usually in the middle of the night. So you could park on the street and you could drive unhindered.
Right.
But that's how ridiculous it was. They didn't pick up the phone.
No, I remember.
And the Dallas sheriff, they gave you a piece of paper. I got this guy out of jail. They stamped a piece of paper. Oh, the other thing about it was that you had to call a judge to grant the writ and post a bond. And it was so perfunctory. And, I thought, how can you do this to these judicial persons? I mean, well, I didn't realize that one of those judicial persons would run for election. And these were people who were going to fund their campaigns, and they were delighted to have you call them at 9 at night at home because they were doing you a favor. And there were certain informal rules. You didn't call after a certain hour unless it was a felony and all that. Anyway, there's a famous and highly regarded misdemeanor judge named Ben Ellis. And I remember I was so formal and proper, and I'd call him up and say, Judge Ellis, this is Vincent Perini. I'm sorry to bother you at home, but I have a man who is charged with DW, and he would just break in and say, $200 on the 13th. and then, I'm standing there, there's a sheriff's deputy across the counter. I hand him the phone. And the judge says $200 on the 13th. That was the bail, and the return date on the writ was 13th. Anyway, that was the kind of madness that was going on, and that's the kind of stuff that I taught. And meanwhile, I was learning a lot about criminal law, so I wasn't totally unqualified to teach that course. The reason I taught that course was it was Walter Steele's course. Walter was very prominent and good teacher, but he took a sabbatical, and we knew each other, and he must have had high regard for me. Said, will you take this practice course while I'm gone? I taught him about 3 or 4 semesters. And, of course, as is always the case, I learned more than the students because I had to work it up. And that really got me going. Now, I've told you that I joined the TCDLA, but, because I was so delighted something was going to happen. So one of the first things I did, I put on a seminar, and I really made it a good seminar, and everybody sung my praises, and I was very pleased with myself. But I established something. Well, along about this time, if you recall, it was illegal for lawyers. It was unethical for lawyers to solicit business. You could not advertise.
Right.
And it was a terrible problem because how is a client going to find a lawyer? How's a lawyer going to find a client? And we all knew that the big firms had something going. They all had a golfing partner who spent most of his time at the country club playing golf and, making friends with corporate executives who would funnel the business and all that. The poor criminal lawyers, the guys on the street didn't have anything like that. And I just, because I was going to come here and talk about this, I was looking at what I had at home, and I had a minimum fee schedule from the State Bar. Mm-hmm. And talk about an archaic and interesting artifact from the past. But there it was. And there were statements about your obligation to not go below these amounts.
Right.
And, of course, it was busted by the Supreme Court in a short order soon thereafter as a violation of antitrust. It had the effect of setting fees across the board and putting a floor so you couldn't compete. Anyway, so anyway, I'm sorry. I put on that course, and so the problem was getting lawyers and clients together, and they saw around the country they were doing specialization, and so we did it too. And because I was a comer and had a reputation, I got appointed to be on the Commission for Criminal Law to study this matter of specialization. We had 3 groups: criminal, family, and labor. It's going to be the experiment. Just an experimental program. Let's see how it works. So we went to work on, okay, how are we going to decide this? And, we thought, well, some of the states would do. You can get 10 lawyers to write a letter for you and 5 judges to write a letter, and your mother saying it's your specialized, and you'd be a special. Well, that obviously doesn't fit the bill. And so here I am, a law student who was angry about law school the whole time, and I'm saying, There's only one way to do this, an examination, just like law school. And of course, I'd been through a bar review course, and that's a very special kind of learning and examination for lawyers. And you see how it works. I mean, high intensity, that those people are serious about passing the bar. And in the course of all this, I got hired one year for the new BRI program that was relatively new. I got hired to do one of the presentations, and I was not invited back. I wasn't good enough, because if you paid attention to those speakers, they'd have a half hour or 40 minutes, and boy, they were good. They kept you awake. You know, they gave me wonderful presentations. So I don't doubt that I wasn't hired back, but I was able to get on the inside of that and see how it worked. And they had wonderful outlines and outline forms. They made you adhere, their people to adhere. So I'm on this specialization thing, and we recommend, we wind up saying you just have to have an exam. Bill Derrick in El Paso was the chairman of this experimental program, this state bar.
Burleson was the immediate past president, the third president, I believe, of TCDLA, maybe the second. And George Gilkerson, I think, was the president at that time.
Correct.
And so I was involved in all this stuff, and I wound up going to some meeting in Austin where they were talking about these things. And in Austin, I said, this is an opportunity actually to sort of bootstrap this, because if we have an examination, you've got to have a review course, because your exam is supposed to cover everything, and it's supposed to be legitimate. And that would be an opportunity to really make an inroad into what had been a pretty haphazard, sloppy business up until that time. And so I wrote this long letter to Bill Derrick and Phil Burleson with a copy to George Gilkerson, putting my ideas out, and I just laid it out, and I just basically explained, I laid out the plan for what became for the state bar, the advanced courses in myriad subjects. The very first one was in the summer of '75 at SMU, and it was criminal law, and I was the director, and I'd written this letter. And
which was July 23rd of 1974.
There it is. And it's all there. I mean, I'm just typically loquacious, but it's about 4 pages, but I explained everything. And so I laid it out, and it turns out, I mean, that really was it. And I got a call from the state bar, from a board member, and he said, "We want you to do this. You see if you can do it, and we'll pay you a little fee, an honorary to do it." Of course, I jumped at the chance. And, well, it was in '75, and I was probably still teaching a course at SMU, but I was just now up to my neck with all this academic stuff and just blowing and going, having a high old time. Anyway, so I designed, and I did design it. I mean, they didn't have anything like it. I took the BRI outline form, and for years it was the template for the advanced courses, because it was the first page of the constitutional law outline. And they did, Roman numeral 1, capital A, Arabic numeral 1, small a. And when you do it that way, that's an analytical tool. You have got to be comprehensive. You can't fudge. And I made rules. I mean, I said, you can never say query, as they were fond of having an outline where they would say, well, gee, what do you suppose would happen if this, query? No, if you don't have an answer, you don't do it. There's none of that stuff. This is for real. And so, and we did things like that. Now, here's how, I told you how haphazard it was. Back then we had selectric typewriters with a little ball. And you could interchange them. It's just like on your computer, the various fonts, but you use a ball. Mm-hmm. I said, we're going to use this, I don't know what it was, but some standard stuff. But everybody's going to use the same one. And if you don't have it, the state bar will send you one. And so they all had the same font. They were all following this form. And in the first year, the entire contents of the advanced course were in a single volume. because they had outlines. Now, jump ahead.
And that was a 5-day course the first time you put it on, Pete.
Yes.
5 days.
The point is that we could do it you by the outline form, you could do it small. Now, later on, especially with computers, it's so easy to sort of think, why should I try to analyze this and risk embarrassing myself when I can just pull out this paragraph from the case and plunk it into my so-called outline. They don't do outlines anymore. It's a paper. And I think the State Bar, and I think I'm right, but I have no reason except what's obvious, that in time, people were going to these advanced courses, paying a lot of money, and the State Bar would, give them these ponderous books and binders with all this stuff, and you had the feeling that you really had something. And I thought, in many instances they would go on the shelf and never be opened. But it was for the lawyers, it was a kind of a totem, a kind of a symbol of their. I went to this course and look at that, And anyway, I've always regretted that they didn't stick to the tighter form because I think it would have been easier and it would have saved a lot of paper. Anyway, now of course it's all changed with the computer. It's all different. So I planned this thing out. I was such an idealist. I thought we couldn't have all these things all day. We had to have night sessions. And since it was a multiple day course, which was pretty unheard of, there those people would be, and we ought to go ahead and just use the evenings. And we did. Well, they never did that again. It turned out it was unnecessary. I arranged with the SMU natatorium to let these lawyers swim. I mean, it was just, you think about it, it's just hilarious when we did all these things. And the lawyers stayed in the SMU dormitories. I mean, nobody had ever done anything quite like this. And the first year, so there was the course. And at 9 o'clock, all the speakers and stuff had been getting all these tomes from me, being obnoxious about excellence, this, that, and the other. And the word had gotten out, and this stuff in the Bar Journal where they started publicizing, this is something brand new, this is going to be special. It was at SMU in the new building, in I guess
Underwood
Archer, the big Underwood, library. It had beautiful classrooms on the lower level, and that's where we did it. And at 9 o'clock on Monday morning, there were lawyers seated there like first graders in their chairs with their hands folded, ready to go. Not a bunch of people out in the hall drinking coffee and smoking and chewing the fat who would wander in. I thought that was a clue. Anyway, we did the thing, and of course it got tremendous compliments. And the first year, I don't know if you know this, David, but we paid the speakers.
Yes, I do know that.
And the writers, and I had been down that road, and I thought, they really ought to get something. I mean, writing an outline on a serious thing. So we had a scale. If you did both the outline and the speech, you'd get this much. And we did that the first year. Well, they never did it again because they didn't want to put that. They didn't want to put that money out. And the State Bar was in financial trouble because we had just built the big Austin building. It's there now, the headquarters. But it was expensive, and we were having some problems, and it was political, and you don't want to raise dues and all that stuff. Well, this is a really interesting deal. Now, pushed way, 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 way ahead, and we have mandatory CLE. You can't have a law license in Texas if you don't go to courses. And by the way, here's the course, and it's going to be $700 or whatever. Anyway, it's worked out well, and the State Bar hasn't raised. I don't think there's been a dues raise almost from that time. That
I worked in business. It changed the personality of the state bar, because now, instead of every year, and it's just like the criminal law section of the state bar of Texas is having its meeting during the advanced course next month in in criminal law. So you let that, because that acknowledges the fact that except for TCDLA, that's a gathering of the Klan. It includes judges and prosecutors besides the defense lawyers. But anyway, that sort of changed the character of it. For better or for worse, depending on what was at issue. But the main thing was it bootstrapped legal education, I think. And I don't know, but I think probably it's been followed in a lot of jurisdictions. It should be. And by and large, the standards have been kept up. There was a little slippage for a while. But it's such an honor to speak. It's such a big deal. There's so many people acclimated, and if you're an expert in the area, it's not that difficult to do it. So anyway, I did the sports right here, and that was wonderful. Now, you want me to keep talking, and you don't want to end this. I don't know if somebody's waiting out in the hall. But well, tell me.
Hey, V, we've got 60 minutes of tape. So you want to keep... I was going to just ask you, or just suggest that first advanced course that you planned and were the course director of, that led to the TCDLA short course in state law, and the TCDLA short course federal law. And the short course state law is now the Rusty Duncan which are here this year. So you're the genesis of that.
No, that's true. And the standard they follow it. And of course today, probably half of the speakers at Rusty Duncan that's going on right now will be speakers next month at the advanced course of the state. Experts. But I'm very proud of that. And I'm amazed. But really, profession at large. Remember, TCDLA was first. They were the first state organization. NACDL was not worth a damn, if you want to know the truth. I used to go to those meetings, and, I was eager. You bet. One year, I think I remember, it was basically a golfing vacation for the families and the criminal defense lawyers around the land, and they would get together and work done, but it wasn't a great big deal where a lot of youngsters were welcome. It wasn't really made for that. So one year, the annual meeting was at the Playboy Hotel Club on Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And so Jim Shello was the president from Milwaukee, very prominent, capable lawyer, and he picked the place. Wasn't really thinking about people like me, but anyway. So I remember riding the shuttle from O'Hare Airport to Lake Geneva, and we turned in, and as we turned in, we're up high. I'm looking down, and a Mercedes-Benz with Jim Shello driving is going the other direction, and I saw the brass of the NACDL with him. They were going to go have dinner at some nice place on the lake. I was going to go up there with those bunnies, and it was all kind of mediocre, and you were trapped. I mean, there was nothing. We wasn't on the lake. It was hilarious, but that's an example. Now, they did a lot of good things, but it was nothing like it is now. Mm-hmm. And I haven't been active in NACDL, but, so many of our presidents have been presidents there, and so it's an entirely different organization. That's good. California followed us, and so we've made an enormous stride, and the guys who founded this thing,
probably never dreamt. I mean, it was a tremendous need. That's why they did it. And I think they founded it TCDLA because they saw the Texas Trial Lawyers Association had been so potent in the legislature. And I certainly didn't understand it until later, and I don't know whether they did or not, but we never had that kind of money to play with in the legislature.
Right.
The plaintiffs' lawyers, that's the big time, and they can really put some money behind candidates and threaten people. I mean, it's where the action is. And we just didn't have it. So we were scrounging always in the early days for just our membership, and getting people to join. And I don't remember what it cost, but it wasn't much. So we just never had a lot of money. And our people, some of them had a lot of money, and they could do what they wanted to politically, but we didn't have the juggernaut that the trial lawyers did. But we were there, and Frank Maloney was there. He was the first president. He was in Austin, and a brilliant, wonderful man. Been a tremendous leader of criminal lawyers in Texas for decades. And he was the first president of this organization. But he was there in Austin, and he would go to the legislature and testify. And I've already said that Henry Way didn't go from Dallas, but Carol Vance did. And Carol Vance was a thoughtful person. He didn't go down there with an axe to grind, as a rule. And so these various things would come up before the legislature, and there was a senator from El Paso named Toddy Esteban. I say it for years, and now I can't pronounce it. Toddy Esteban. I'm leaving out a syllable. And I know he and Frank, and he knew the rules. He knew, and of course it's arcane and in many respects ridiculous. But if you know how to play the game, it really works, and it worked for us for a long time. Now, I'm going to skip forward at the time I became president, and so it's I don't know, it's related, but it has to do with our political clout and so forth. But all of us expected for John Hill, who was the Attorney General, prominent plaintiffs' lawyers, high-minded, good man, to win the gubernatorial race in '78. I think is what it was. And we were all shocked because Bill Clements from Dallas, the oil man, won as a Republican, first Republican since Reconstruction. Big deal. And of course he was full of all sorts of conservative ideas and stuff. Well, there are two things about this I want to talk about. One is the war we got into with Ross Perot from Dallas, which is nothing really but comic relief, but it is interesting. And also because I, at that time, had gotten involved in some legislation we were trying to get through that would reform the indigent defense system in Texas. It was silly. Back then you got paid by the appearance, and there was no hourly rate. There was not much. There wasn't an upper limit, and whatever the judge said, the commissioners had to pay. But of course, those judges are no fools. They're in politics, and they would try to save money by squeezing the guys who are representing indigents. And you just get really mad at the way it worked. So that was going on at the same time. So here's the point about the indigent defense bill. I was down there for 3 sessions. I was a state bar committee on court-appointed lawyers. I don't remember if I was doing something. I was just on the board of TCDLA at first. Then I was president. But for 3 sessions, I tried to get this thing through, and finally gave up. In the first year, it passed. Hallelujah. Well, and I looked to see who was advising Bill Clements, and it was a guy at the state bar whom I knew and respected, a good guy, and he knew us, and gee, well, how naive. Boom, it was vetoed, and who blames him? Why are we giving a bunch of money to these lawyers representing criminals? Are you kidding? And never passed again. It changed because I tried to set it up so it was self-funding and stuff. In the end, it was just madness. But it did lay the groundwork. I don't know whether it had any effect later on when Senator Ellis came along and did his stuff. But I talked to people, and it's like, if you're running out, So anyway, So I tried to do that, and it failed. But I worked on that, and I talked to all these people for the head of a man named Sam Clounce, I think, was head of the Association of Counties. Association of Counties. And so I laid the groundwork to say, I don't know whether it had any effect, but it was an attempt. Now, the other thing about Bill Clements was he appointed his pal from Dallas, Ross Perot, to take over the drug. There's a war on drugs because back then it was really hot, and it was a big deal. And he came out swinging. Ross Perot didn't know what he was talking about. He was to get these criminals. He was astonished that these lawyers were representing them. I mean, really, he's a good person and has done great things, but he's in his own right. He's extremely bold and reckless. And so I wound up debating him and doing stuff. I was on TV because he wanted a wiretap law for the state to have it. Well, there was a federal law, and we were opposed to it altogether. And if I remember, it passed, but it had been substantially mitigated from our point of view by the sharp knives down in Austin, Maloney and Cuddy Esteban. And but I was the front man because I was the president of TCDLA. We got into this stuff, and I was debating Perot and on the public television station in Dallas, and had a spot for me to do at one of the other stations against this wiretap law. And then it got hot because this is when the Iranians had taken our embassy and had all those prisoners. It was a big damn deal, and they got a couple of people that worked for Ross Perot in jail in Iran, and Perot sent his own crew of commandos over there to break into an Iranian prison and get his people out. And it worked. He did better than the U.S. We tried and failed to get our people out. Anyway, and so Ramsey Clark, who's a Texan, his father had been on the Supreme Court, but he had been the Attorney General, I guess. I don't know, it was under Carter or when, but he was in New York, and he went to Iran to try to negotiate the release of those prisoners. Well, they got all hot and bothered about Ramsey Clark. Who's he think he is? Well, and so I wrote a letter to Benjamin Civiletti, who was the Attorney General of the United States, saying, and they were threatening, the point was they were threatening prosecution for Ramsey Clark. And there was a newspaper article in this batch of stuff where it said, we're looking at, it said we're looking at Perot. But the bottom line was, I wrote a letter to Civiletti saying, well, by the way, if you're going to do something to Ramsey Clark, those guys violated federal law when they broke into other country's jail. And I laid it out. I don't know whether I was the first or had any impact or not, but from our point of view in Texas, it was a big deal. And the other thing with Perot was, I remember a meeting in San Antonio, a board meeting, and we were just beside ourselves. We were that he was saying these terrible things and doing all this stuff. And we decided to send a delegation over to talk to Bill Clements about toning down Ross Perot. And, I was naive, but the other two people were Bob Jones, who was then a lawyer, but well known in Austin. He was president-elect. And Wagner Carr, who had been a very prominent state politician, but had got the importance of criminal defense lawyers, changed his whole personality.
That was a Sharpstown, part of the Sharpstown.
Yeah, Sharpstown, part of Sharpstown. And we went over to see Bill Clements, and he greeted us. And he was very nice, and we said, we need you to tone him down. Gee, well, nothing ever happened. That's the way it goes. Anyway, the other one of the things I wanted to talk about was that I'd gotten on this kick about economics. So I'm now at the ABA, and at their criminal justice section, they created a committee for me in the section of economics of the profession. You see, part of this was because I couldn't get anybody to tell me how to set fees. And so I wrote all this stuff, and I wound up writing a monograph for the ABA that was published by the criminal law section, general practice, and the economics of the profession. It's out of print, but it's about setting and collecting fees in criminal cases. And and we put on a program in San Francisco that was a big professional economics, and at the same time, nationally, there was a big movement to get small lawyers to keep time and all this. And I got into that. Harris Morgan in Greenville was very prominent and was a friend, and I became part of their little claque going around the state talking about these things. Anyway, so the ABA we put on a seminar at the annual convention and about economics and criminal practice, and I did it and basically put it together, and we called it, and we had all these prominent lawyers were there on a panel, Jerry Goldstein, and people you would recognize here far on each coast, talking about setting fees, and the main speaker was Racehorse Ames, and he came and I was reading it the other day, and he talked on and on and on, having a good time, laughing. He didn't tell us anything, but I mean, it was a lot of fun. But I titled the program, How to Practice Criminal Law and Still Send Your Kids to College. Well, when the time came, and one of the people that was invited to be on the panel was Dominic Gentile from Las Vegas, a very prominent lawyer, who subsequently became famous because he was involved in a Supreme Court case about publicity. But so he was on the panel, and I said to him, that was very presumptuous. I don't feel like I'm going to send anybody to college at the rate I'm going. This is tough. And I was bemoaning. He said, you should have named it, if you're going to practice criminal law, make sure your kid knows how to play basketball. Wow. Anyway, that was kind of the high. Well, and so the one other thing that has to do with that was I and some others were beating the drums at the ABA about the whole business of indigent defense across the land. And we thought that if only the Uptown Bar realized how we were sacrificing, they'd help. And that turned out to be naive, but it was the beginning in so many ways of what's happened since then toward at least improving it, the amount paid and the various ways of appointing lawyers and stuff. And so anyway, and we wound up creating in the ABA something we call the Bar Information Program, and that was because we were going to inform the bar about this problem. It was also kind of a stealth title because it didn't involve money for criminal lawyers. Anyway, that lasted. It's still there as far as I know. But I mean, I went to these meetings year after year of this group, and there were a bunch of prominent people. Bob Spangenberg was the #1 superstar, he was a great leader and all that. But we had those guys going around the country, and they did some stuff here. When I was chairman of this death penalty committee, getting lawyers for the death penalty in the 90s, I got the Bar Foundation to do a grant, and we got Spangenberg to do a study of the Texas system.
I remember that.
And so on. Now here's another story, and I'm going to end here. It's a good place to end, about indigent defense. Lawyers in Fort Worth represented a person in a federal criminal case, and they negotiated beforehand with the judge what they were going to be paid. Well, case is over. Now they're appealing. Judge said, same deal, and they go through it. But they're small people, small firms, and big investment. And when the time came, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals wouldn't pay the rate, or wouldn't pay much, and they were beside themselves. These guys are all friends. Anyway, I was watching that and talking with them because I'd made myself an expert in all this stuff. And so I wrote this letter to Judge Pulies, who was the chief judge of the Fifth Circuit. And I said, there are a lot of people I know who are not doing federal appeals because they've had such a tough time getting paid. And that what you guys, the people down in New Orleans are just routinely docking the amounts. And they're thinking, well, these lawyers, they're getting paid too much. And that was what was happening here. But, of course, they wanted $200,000 or something. So I wrote this letter. And I'm sitting in my office, receptionist ring. You got a call from Henry Police. And Henry Police was enormously popular, wonderful man, wonderful human being, wonderful judge. I should preface that, because what I'm going to tell now is how old-fashioned he was, but it perfectly encapsulates the problem. He said, do you know how much they've already been paid? He said this to me. And I said, well, Judge, what difference does that make? When you think about it, I mean, you think somebody who's doing highway work out here and they say we want to do a second bridge, you think he doesn't get paid for the second bridge? Of course he does. But these were lawyers. And then he said, you know, when I was a young lawyer, we just took care of these things. And we know what that meant. I mean, back in the day, and that was even before Gideon versus Wainwright, when he was a young lawyer, and they did take care of it the best they could. But it was an entirely different world, you know, I mean, just totally inappropriate. And then he said, you know, if we pay them this money, we're going to run out of money and we won't be able to pay you on your cases. Well, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in the United States, when you start thinking about who's important here, and you start with, maybe that's part of the most important 500 or 1,000 people in this entire nation, the richest in history, and the chief judge is telling me we're going to run out of money. So, you know, and this is why I respect him utterly and understand, because I was making myself proficient in this area. I knew so much, and poor Judge Police was just kind of, but he's a wonderful guy. He called me up. Get it on. I want to talk to this guy. And he was going to argue with me. And anyway, of course, actually things changed in the federal system. It had nothing to do with this, but it's no longer the same deal. But I thought that was wonderful about him that he would call me. And it was all part of the grist for the mill, the stuff I was doing, all those times. And you know, I'm very pleased because things that have changed in terms of indigent defense, both state and federal, and I've had a hand in that, and I'm very proud of myself.
And we're very proud of you for everything you've done for TCDLA and the system.
Thank you.
Thank you again for sharing your candid thoughts with us and participating in this interview, V. And
thank you.
Again, congratulations for your induction. It should have happened a long time ago.
Well, and I really do appreciate it. I mean, I hadn't thought much about it, but yes, it's very nice, and I'm glad. Thank you.